Welcome back to Mystery Fabric Game, where we identify textiles. Last week's textile was cambric linen, also known as batiste linen, handkerchief linen, or linen lawn. It is defined by its fiber, linen, its yarn, a medium twist, its structure, a plain weave, and its finish, which is a chlorine bleach and optical whitening. We're going to go over what it is and what it's not and why, linen cambric's uses, a brief history, production process, environmental impact, and review the properties that we went over last week that identified it. This particular linen is from Burney and Tilbridge Company, and it is a lightweight cambric linen. Cambric is from the Flemish in late Middle English, named for a northern French town, Cambria. Now, we got it from the Flemish in 1530 for English, but if you're wondering why it's a French town, but we got it from Flemish, well, it wasn't French until 1677. Now in English, we didn't lose the association from linen to cotton until the 19th century. So we can tell a few things that it's not based off of its fiber. It's not a linsey woolsey or cotton, which we could tell from our tests that we did. It is not a boucle because of the yarn, sharkskin because of the high twist, butcher linen because of the toe fibers used, homespun because of how nicely and tightly woven it is, chambray because it doesn't have the colored warp thread, and you can see the difference in the yarn in the boucle that's pictured directly behind this. We also know from its structure that it's not a damask because it's not a plain and satin weave. We also know it's not a bird's eye linen because it is not a jacquard weave, or a huck because it's not a dolby weave, or toweling partially because of its weight as well as its tightly weave. We also know from its finish that it's not a Holland linen, which would have oil and starch for lampshades, or organdy, which is made out of a cotton and stuck in acid for its sheerness and stiffness. We also know by its weight that it's not a gauze, which is lighter, or a glass toweling or dish toweling, which is heavier, nice for toweling because it doesn't leave lint. It isn't art linen or embroidery linen. It isn't sheeting, suiting, butcher linen, linen canvas, or sailcloth. All right, let's talk uses. You can make some fine shirts, linens, handkerchiefs, ruffs, and fancy needlework out of this stuff. Now, the history is very, very old. We have the oldest extant piece in a cave in Georgia that is 36,000 years old, and the linen industry in Egypt is over 4,000 years old. Now, the first written documentation that we have of it is in Pylos, Greece, which mentions women linen workers as well. And if we have any particular entomology nerds out there, we've got a little bit more coming for you here with the Phoenicians of alphabet fame introduced it originally in Ireland. Now, as far as entomology goes, we might as well go into that a little bit further. Linen also comes from the Latin linum and the Greek linon, and derivatives include line, lining, and lingerie, which the French, oh man, don't get me started as to why it's spelled like that, but it comes from linen, which makes a lot of sense, honestly. Now, next up is the processing. So we start with the linen plant, and it is really quite beautiful flowers, and after it turns to a nice beautiful gold, the seeds are removed in a process that's called rippling. And you want to wait until it's a gold, but not a brown, and certainly not green, for the strongest fiber. Now, to get to all that lovely fibers on the inside and get past the outside crust there of pectin, wax, and gum, the plants are pulled up by the root and left out in a process called retting, which in fields, like is seen here, is called dew retting and results in a darker, more gray fiber, and is one of the more environmentally friendly options. It's uses the dew and the natural decomposition process to remove the pectin wax and gum. Now, there's also water retting, which results in a more yellow and lighter colored fiber, which can be done just in water, which is a little bit faster, or really much faster with enzymes or even sodium hydroxide to remove all of the excess exterior very quickly. Then, once everything is dried, it is balled up for the next step, which is scratching, which is when the dried stalks are crushed between two textured metal rollers, these days anyway, to remove the stalks. And then we have hackling, which is a kind of combing to remove all of the tow and the small fibers through different kinds of combs and densities to end up with the very fine and long line fibers. Now, when you have all of those beautiful line fibers left, it's usually worked wet, which, as you can imagine, with the spinning, the only fiber that gets stronger when it's wet is linen. So working with it wet means that it's less likely to snap even in the finest threads. Once it is processed, it's after hackling, it's put into a finely kind of fluffy chunk called a sliver, then loosely spun into roving, and then put under tension into a ring, which you can see in this picture here, and twisted into fibers together into a fine strand. The yarns are then wound onto a spool and oftentimes sized in a process called creeling to be wound onto a warp beam and then threaded through heddles and onto the loom. Now, the weave itself is a plain weave, so it is woven over and under in a balanced, even weave with every other thread going over and under. You can kind of see in this process here a small version of that, where you can see the weft yarn go back and forth through the loom there and the shed, which is the space in between the threads there. And this would be done in an industrial process, either with a shuttle kind of like this, except pushed with air, or with water, or with pre-cut weft, which you can see the little ends sticking out of your side. Now, the finish is something that changes the appearance, the hand, or performance of a fabric. As after it is woven, it is washed, and all of the sizing that was added to the warp yarns would be washed out using a physical agitation, biological enzyme, or a chemical wash. And then the entire fabric would be exposed to the chlorine bleaches that would remove the yellow or grayish color to the fiber, as well as the additive of the optical brighteners, which is a fluorescent whitening compound that absorbs ultraviolet light and refracts it back into visible light to make it look less yellow and more white. It is also a very shiny kind of thing to look at under a microscope, which we saw before. Now, once you have all of this going on, you very well might have it in a tentering process to dry, which it has pins or clips on the grain and cross grain to keep it under tension, while it is dried with either by hot air or sometimes hot rollers. And that's why you get the little dots on the edge of your selvage edge. It also can be calendared, which is run through hot rollers at tension to keep it smooth and wrinkle-free and give it a slightly shiny appearance. All right, let's take a moment to talk about environmental impact. So the fiber uses less water and fewer pesticides than cotton because of its thick exterior, but the erosion from pulling it up from its roots and its water use for water retting is fairly high. Now, for the weave, shuttle noise causes some noise pollution, although most looms are now shuttleless air jet looms. Water jet looms reuse water, but the drying process takes a lot of electricity, and air jet looms use 3 times as much as electricity as shuttle projectile looms. Lint is lower than cotton, but white long is still a problem and is combated with vacuum heads everywhere, and the sizing for warp threads is partially reclaimed and reused. For finishing, traditional finishing requires lots of water and electricity, but these days, a lot of places are switching to foam finishing, which requires less water and less electricity. Speed round for textile properties. The crush test shows that the resilience is low, and also this has low conductivity, so you're less likely to get shocked. For the burn test, it does not pull away from the flame. It does not melt. It burns readily with a light gray smoke. It continues to burn. It does not self-extinguish, and it has a sweet, papery smell with light gray, soft, feathery, smooth ash. How lovely. Now the finish has optical whitening, and it has also a plain weave, which is very easy to note in this right here. It survives all of these acids. It does not mind acids, it's fine, except for 70% solution of sulfuric acid. It has low heat retention. It has good abrasion resistance, good lighting resistance, medium tenacity, high absorbency, and high density. It has a bast fiber with long fiber length, with a yarn structure and S structure with medium twist. And here's the chemical. I hope that was very helpful for you to know your textiles better. And next time, this Thursday, tune in again and find out what next week's mystery fabric is and see how well you fare in identifying it. And check out this link.